Just how much are families and married life going to be completely undermined in Australia because of the pandemic? Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I want to talk about something that is not being discussed enough. In Australia, a significant proportion of our marriages are between an Australian citizen and a foreigner. This will surprise a lot of people, but it makes up about 1 in 3 marriages, a significant proportion of Australia's overall foreign intake are partners coming to join their beloved ones in Australia to live here permanently as Australians. Now, there's been a lot of roadblocks put in the way in recent years, and another one has just been added. Historically, the cost of the visa was for cost recovery, like most government services of this kind, i.e. that you pay a certain amount. I think it was about $1,400, which covered all the processing and work and investigation required to approve and process such a visa. Then, as a budget measure a number of years ago, they boosted that cost up from $1,400, so a fair amount because the visa takes a long time and a lot of work, right up to over $7,000. Now, that is way beyond cost recovery. I'm not even sure if it's legal. I think if people challenged it in court, it would be a really interesting question whether the government could charge that much, because it is explicitly and only there to raise government revenue, to exploit people who fall in love and want to marry people from overseas and raise money. And this is not me making up. This was in the budget papers when it was first introduced, probably 6 or 7 years ago now. Nevertheless, it hasn't really slowed down the flood of people who get married and want to come to Australia. In part, not least of which, Australia is a very attractive place to live. Wonderful standard of living, nice and safe, high incomes, lots of opportunity, and therefore it makes sense that people would want to get married and come to Australia. Nevertheless, I do think it is concerning that the federal government seeks to exploit people in that way and has been doing so for quite a number of years now. However, the impact of the pandemic, if we think about this, Australia is one of those countries that has locked its borders completely to the outside world. It is unlawful for Australians to travel overseas for almost any reason. And that means it's very, very difficult also for foreigners to come to Australia, certainly not on your normal tourist visas and things like that. Ergo, very difficult for people to come to Australia to get married. Very difficult for Australians to meet people abroad, because often what happens is Australians travel, they travel for long periods of time as part of the culture. And while they're abroad, they meet someone, they fall in love, and the rest is history. I myself am unmarried, but I am a strong believer in the institution, and I do think that if 1/3 of your marriages is being sliced off at the knees due to pandemic and cost prohibits and all kinds of other barriers, then you're going to cause yourself enormous problems down the line. Now, the government has just announced a new English test requirement for partner visas, i.e. your partner must have a suitable level of English before they can live in Australia. Now, I'm not fully against that on principle, but if you add that all together with the other stuff, like if it said, okay, we're going to introduce that test, but we're going to bring the cost down to cost recovery, and we're going to make it easier for people who can get around the pandemic restrictions to meet their loved ones overseas and so on, then I'd be more okay with that. But this seems to be just yet another nail in the coffin, making it harder for people to get married to the people that they love and choose to be with. So this is a serious problem. Then what does that mean for marriage generally in Australia? Now, you could say a few things will happen. Well, obviously, the proportion of people who marry local Australians will increase as a compensatory measure against the fact that they are no longer travelling overseas to meet people abroad. But that won't make up the full difference, and it's not clear to me whether or not the relationships in that category are any more or less successful than the relationships that Australians have when they're dealing with partners abroad. I'd be very interested in seeing those statistics, by the way, if anyone has them, in terms of the success of marriages based on partner visa, or versus those that don't need them because everyone is an Australian citizen. I'd be curious to see that. But 1/3 of the marriages and a significant proportion of the immigration intake are these new families, people coming over, getting married, having children, continuing to the population growth, continuing to be taxpayers and contributing to the multiplicity and diversity of Australian life. This restriction is severe. And the problem is there's no end in sight. Europe has its next wave. There is no real thought to Australians travelling any further than maybe New Zealand before 2021, and by mid-2021 at that. And we live in an age where a lot of people meet online. They meet, various common interest forums that say if you're an Australian who's interested in capoeira or something, well, you might go to Brazil and meet your partner through, kickboxing opera, right? Like it's a really interesting. It's a really interesting phenomena and a really dangerous one, which we've created this demographic time bomb that is going to blow up in our face. We had no thought given to the interruption that this would mean and the systemic problems that this will create down the line in terms of reduced birth rates, greater misery and mental health issues for people being isolated and not being able to sustain partnerships, existing relationships, trying to sustain partnerships over long distances and periods of time with no end in sight. I mean, let's say you were in a committed relationship with someone abroad. How strong is your relationship now? I'd actually be very interested to know if you're in that category, if you've been separated from your long-term partner who is a foreigner and you're stuck in one country, please leave your comment, share your experience. I'll pick that up in a future video because I'm really worried about this. It's very hard to maintain these relationships at the best of times, let alone when there is no opportunity for you to overcome the physical divide. Is it the Australian government's intention to increase the number of marriages that occur between Australian citizens? Do they find it unfortunate or distasteful that people marry foreigners abroad? I don't think so. I think there is certain stereotypes that we need to think about. So there's the classic stereotype, and it has to be said, the sort of the old overweight white guy marrying the small Asian girl from a poor Southeast Asian country, Cambodia or wherever, and then them coming to Australia. That there is something inherently, seemingly repugnant about that. I personally am not judgy. It's people can meet each other in all kinds of circumstances, but I can understand the cringe factor for sure. People getting married to people in the sort of the classic mail order bride. I'm sure that is massively overblown, right? I've spent plenty of time in Russia myself and Eastern Europe. People are very normal, it's sincere and level-headed. I think it's a bit of a trope, the whole mail order bride, that I don't think it's particularly real. People tend to have real relationships with serious people, and it's not an artificial arrangement by any means. So I think a lot of this is myth and prejudice and stereotype rather than reality. Although it is absolutely true that unlike many other countries in the world, Australia's pull is stronger than just the individual. And it's something we do need to keep in mind. That is, and this is getting kind of gauche, but the trope of someone being married for money, right? The way they live in, they might be a multimillionaire, they might be approaching the end of their life, and they marry someone really young, and the skepticism that surrounds that because of the enormous wealth that they are likely to bequeath their new partner. Well, there is that similar idea with Australia. Australia is such a utopia to live in compared to many parts of the world. Perfect air, perfect water, wonderful education, high living standards, very safe. And therefore, the individual, however much they might be someone who others find appealing and that the love, might to them be genuine, there'll be an external suspicion that one of the reasons why the other person wants to get married to that individual is because the advantages they would have here in Australia compared to their home countries. And this is a certain degree of arrogance for Australia. There is much less prejudice towards that if someone is coming over from Britain or the United States or another first world country than that is if it's coming over from, Venezuela or Kenya or a place like that. I don't think it's fair. And I think that we do treat this with an undue degree of skepticism. I'm somewhat suspicious of the Department of Immigration in approaching this. And the other main problem is that we just can't afford, given the demography, to be that picky about this, right? We need to help in this pandemic environment, bring people together, encourage marriages and stable relationships and sustainable families with, parents bringing up the next generation together in a good home life. And, if we increase the diversity in Australian society, that's all the better. So, look, I approve in a standalone sense of the English test. No problem with that if you reduce the price of the actual visa itself down to something that it actually costs recovery and justified, and make it possible for people to travel in such a way that they can meet their partners and bring them home. So that's my view. I've kind of talked about this for a while, but I feel like I'm just slicing the surface of this very big onion and all the ramifications that are likely to follow from that. So do expect more videos on this topic as we tease into some of the implications. If you found value in it so far, do like and subscribe because, as I say, we'll pick it up again. Leave your own views and experiences down below. We'll pick them up in the week in review, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much.